So today we have Frank Demmler. Thank you so much for coming. Frank Demmler has served as adjunct teaching professor of entrepreneurship at the Donald H. Jones Center for Entrepreneurship at the Tepper School of Business since 1987. Until 2018, he served as Innovation Works Vice President of Entrepreneurial Services, leading the organization's seed investment of over $75 million in over 300 companies during his tenure. He has more than 35 years of experience advising both entrepreneurs and angel investors, and he holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from Princeton University, a master's degree in General Management from the University of California at Los Angeles Graduate School of Management, and pursued his postgraduate studies in marketing at the Harvard Business School. So Frank, I'll let you get started.
All right, a little warning. This is the first time I've been involved in this particular setup, so bear with me if there are hiccups along the way. Also, are three of you here or one of you here? This may be a private lecture to you. See, your tuition was worth something. You get one-on-one consulting from an expert in a field and doesn't cost you any incremental money. How about that? Okay. So equity compensation. This is a topic that I'm sure is near and dear to your hearts. If you're a first-time entrepreneur and haven't started your business yet, what I'm about to talk about today is going to be extremely important to you so that you can make some critical decisions at the beginning of your company with some knowledge about their implications and perhaps long-term impact. If you've already started your company and you've already split the founder's pie, then you can hear what I would have told you to do if you had talked to me before you did that. And we'll talk about some of the remedies, if there are issues involved, how you might address those issues to put things back on an even keel. So, and then beyond the startup side is the ongoing operation of the company and the roles of equity compensation, primarily stock options, that come into play. So, okay, what did I?
Let's see if it's good. And then get rid of what's in.
There we go. Okay, so why do you care? Well, if you're a founder of a company, at the point in time that the company starts, you have to decide who owns what of the company. And that's one of the things that is, quote unquote, sort of unfair to the first-time entrepreneur, because that's not a simple question. And without insight and knowledge on why that's not a simple question, it is possible that there might be mistakes made. If you're recruiting somebody to your company, stock options is usually the incremental part of the compensation that rewards you for taking the risk of joining the company. So the stock options are the element that has the potential to be worth hundreds of thousands, billions, tens of millions of dollars, depending on a lot of circumstances. So if you're recruiting somebody, you need to know how many options or how you should position the options for that individual to get them to come on board. If you're being recruited by an early stage company, then it's the inverse. You need to understand where that option pool fits within the overall structure of the company and how meaningful it might be. And then on an ongoing basis, usually stock options are part of the incentive compensation programs of many of these companies. Usually compensation is going to be a salary, perhaps a cash bonus, depending on the cash position of the company, and stock options. And so understanding those stock options, how meaningful they are and all, is important to you. So all four of these are important items, and all four of them require some level of understanding in order to make everything work the way it should. So let's start with the founder's pie. When you have a company, you're sitting there, perhaps with an attorney, perhaps online with a legal services website. You're looking at it and you have this entity that you're creating, and it's got 100% of the ownership interests of the company right there. And the challenge is, how should that be divided if you have more than just a founder? If you're a sole founder, no issues. But as soon as you have one co-founder, 2, 3, then it becomes an issue. So how do you deal with this? Well, in many cases, the company starts where there's one dominant person who is sort of driving everything, and the other people are buy into the vision of the individual, see the role that they could play, and find the challenge of helping this company realize its potential to be really good. And so in a case like that, you might have a founder owning half of the company and the balance of the equity being divided among co-founders. Also, a situation might be there's sort of a common pecking order from most important to sort of least important, or most contributory to least. And so there might be just sort of a natural division of most important, then next, along these lines. More often than not, and I would say probably more than 50% of new companies of the type we're talking about get started by dividing the founder's pie equally among the founders. And generally speaking, the conventional wisdom is, you got 100, you have X number of founders, 2, 3, or 4, and you divide that into 100, and that'll tell you the percentage that each of the founders would get from the founder's pie. And when pushed on this as to why you chose this method, most of those first-time entrepreneurs will basically position it that it's fair. So, we're all here. We've all fallen in love with this opportunity. We're all going to help and make it very successful. And therefore, trying to divide the pie any other way probably is impossible to do, difficult to do, unwise to do, whatever. And I'm here to tell you that conventional wisdom is wrong. And if you do it the way, even for each of the founders, you may have seriously wounded your company and may have put it on a path to failure. Because as time progresses and you attract capital, The new investors are going to be taking a look at the management team, the stock option program, and see if the people involved appear to be compensated at the proper level, motivated at the proper level. And if the CEO is in for 25%, and based upon the structure of the company and that investor's history, if that CEO really ought to have about 40% of the company, that delta will be troublesome to the investors. And also by that time of the company's history, it'll be troublesome to the CEO, as what has occurred shows that being fair at the cut of the founder's pie was really an illusion. And in fact, it was unfair in terms of recognizing the contributions to people. So if this could be wrong, what should you do? That's what we're going to talk about. So yeah, if you got two founders, just think about it. One jumps in, gonna make it happen. The other founder keeps her job, helps at night, helps on weekends. And that starts off okay. But 6 months down the line, the person who's jumped in hasn't had any income for 6 months. The other founder is still making her salary. You're doing the work that the company needs. The other founder is contributing on the side. It's not a dominant or major incentive in their life. And so that may, I believe you'll find that really isn't a fair distribution, 50-50. Here's another classic situation. You start the company. Nobody knows where the company's going to go. You know where you hope it goes. And company gets out of the starting blocks, is doing very well, supports personal income to the two founders of say $400,000 each because it's generated that level of profitability. And one founder says, I can live nice and comfortably on $400,000. Rather than reinvesting it in the company, I think we ought to take it out in compensation now. And our company is so good that based upon momentum and all, the level of profitability and operation will retain its profitability profile. The other founder started this because he wanted to change the world. The technology was such that it could become foundational to how we live our lives, how we communicate, how we compute. And that founder wants to put everything the company generates back into the company to grow it, to exploit the opportunity. And at 50-50, how do you resolve that? What happens if the company needs money? One founder puts it in, the other one doesn't. How do you deal with that? And this is just when you've got two people. So what happens when you have 3, 4, or 5 people each having their own vision of what they ought to be getting? All right. So I hope that through those little vignettes, you get a sense of how does fairness come into this. So, the purpose of the founder's pie and why it is particularly challenging, particularly for a first-time entrepreneur, is the founder's pie is going to distribute shares of stock in a company. And the size of that pot that's being provided is intended to compensate each member for their contributions to date and to compensate each member for their contributions into the future. And having a crystal ball that allows you to look at the future well enough and be able to assign those responsibilities is a challenge, but has to be done. And what it's also set up to do is align the agendas of the people of the company so that they're all singing from the same hymn. So for sakes of argument, let's say there are 5 elements of value in a startup. There's the idea. Somebody needs to invent something, dream of something, create something. There's a business. So you need a business model. Once this company gets going, how does it make money? How does it build value? Who do you have that has relevant domain experience, relevant contacts, relative track record of accomplishment, those kind of things? Who's making a commitment and taking on risk? And who's taking responsibility? So I'm going to advise you, if you accept that, then let's take a look at a university spinout. Founder 1 is a faculty member, tenured faculty in a technology area, is a luminary within the industry, gives lots of presentations at academic and commercial meetings, and is sort of looked to as the guy or the girl. And then you've got founder 2, a business guy. Hi, Dave.
This is Yoda. He is the Jedi master of all things entrepreneurial, so people can see online. And we say you're not an entrepreneur in Pittsburgh until you've been hit upside the head by a 2x frame. So suck it in, absorb it. This is true wisdom.
I did not pay him to do that. Matter of fact, I would have paid him not to do that. But so usually if you've got a technology startup coming out of a university, that the founding team or the people that are initially involved are likely to be fellow technologists, students, faculty, or whatever, and may or may not involve a business person. Fortunately, here at CMU, the barriers between the business school and particularly the Entrepreneurship Center and the balance of the campus is very accessible in both directions. This wasn't true, say, 10 years ago, but you are the beneficiaries of a lot of hard work by a lot of people over the years that have allowed this to happen. And Don Jones was one of the first contributors to the Entrepreneurship Center back in 1990. And then Jim Swartz was a major benefactor to the program. I don't know what the year was, but when this building was being built, that contribution went into creating this area. So ultimately, and the sooner rather than later, you need a business person. Founder 3 is a postdoc. This person is important because they know how to use the technology. They know how to create the technology. If it's a chemical formula, they're the ones that know what to do in what order in order to get the outcome. If it's an algorithm that does optimization of something, this is the person who knows how to take that algorithm and apply it and provide benefits. And it just so happens that as these discussions were ongoing of should we start a company or not, and how would we do it, we've got a lab tech. Happens to be there, is viewed as part of the founder group. Okay. So the first thing I challenge you to do is take a look at each of the 5 elements of the business and how important are they on a relative basis using a scale of 0 to 10. So in this case, the idea is based upon technology that's been developed, typically patented by the university in many cases. The business model at this time is less important other than the fact that there are business models for the type of business that you're doing so that an investor can appreciate where this company would likely go. Domain expertise is very important. Somebody has to do it. So the commitment and risk, joining the company, foregoing income, those kind of things are very material. Whether the CEO or whether you're a lab tech, doing that is very important if you don't have people committed. And then responsibilities, which may or may not relate to the commitment and risk. What needs to be done now? Who's going to do it? Who's got to deliver this, that, or the other thing? Applying for patents, interacting with other industry members in a business development capacity, hiring people. Those are all things that have to get done, and somebody with some level of clout within the business has to be assigned to do this. So in this case, we divided it as you see there. Now let's take a look at each of the founders. And I won't go through all of these, but the idea of the founder 1, 10. It's his technology. He's recognized as the inventor. The world recognizes the technology as being his. And so he's very important. And if you look through here, the business model is what founder 2 needs to pay attention to. Founder 2, if that person has joined the company full time without compensation, there are those elements come into play. Founder 3, the technical know-how, the ability to apply it has been important. And then founder 4, like I said, right place, right time. So what this works out to be is sort of a dynamic agenda for a meeting among all of the founders is one path to take. Because if you can't agree on these kind of numbers, I'm more important than you. Does that reflect it? Why are you more important relative to somebody else? How do you divide things? Because again, you're talking about 100% having to be determined. And the way you do that is you find out where everybody's starting from and try to build a common vision of what is the structure of the founders, what are they intended to do, what are they going to contribute to the company, and ultimately, what level of compensation does that? Oops. Well, Dave, shouldn't have done that. Excuse me. Moving. Okay. So anyhow, you go through that process. And when you pull it all together, you end up with a total of 321 points. And so you take a look at that, you take a look at the points that are distributed among the people. You'll see that there are percentages at the bottom line. Those are not deterministic. They are guidelines. They are directional. They are comparative. And so once you've been through the exercise, you go through the sanity check of, does this make sense between the inventor and the business person? And so you go through the process of coming up with the final numbers. You don't use those as deterministic. Okay, so apologize for the distractions as we're working our way through this, but those are the issues that the Founders Pie raises. And one of the things that people will often ask is, well, I don't want to ask those kind of personal questions about what are their expectations for long-term compensation or all of that. And all I can say is, when you're doing this exercise at the beginning of a company, generally speaking, you have rational people making rational decisions. And those decisions can be fleshed out in a way to try to reach some level of compromise or consistency. 9 months into the company, forget it. All those rational thoughts are out the window. After 9 months, you're looking at, boy, I got screwed. Boy, that person isn't doing what they were supposed to do. Boy, I'm working and I'm not making any money. I deserve more shares. Those kind of things will happen without a doubt. And so trying to fix it after the fact can be very difficult and sometimes impossible. And that's why I caution you that this is an important set of decisions to be made, and the wrong decisions could set the company up to fail. So one of the ways that we deal with this is, as I mentioned, a major portion of the founder's shares are intended to compensate somebody for what they're going to contribute moving into the future. And so that being the case, if for some reason one of the founders were to leave the company or be separated from the company, that founder is no longer doing that job. And the company will still need that chunk of equity to get the right person to do the job. And so founder shares, in most cases, are going to be subject to buyback. So yes, you own your shares, but you don't own them outright. And the typical way I deal with this, which isn't totally conventional, but at closing, each of the founders will own 25% of the shares outright. The balance of the shares are going to be subject to buyback, where that right to buyback extinguishes at the rate of 1/36 per month. So after 3 years, the founder will own the shares outright. But if that person leaves in the second year, you're going to stop the vesting, you're going to exercise a buyback, and you're going to take that chunk of equity and use it to attract a replacement. Yeah.
Are you referring to the part that's already vested or the unvested part or all of it?
I'm talking about the original shares that were created when you started the company, the founder's pie portion.
So the founder that leaves, for example, the company can buy back the vested shares, unvested, of course, they have to back.
Little louder, I'm sorry,
So you're talking about the vested part of the founder's shares that with the founder that's leaving, the company can buy back those shares from the founder.
Yeah.
How does someone figure out the value of those shares?
It is at the original cost, which is what it is. On the part. Voluntarily or otherwise, you are going to get compensated for what's to come. So that's why that 10 bucks, or then you share, or whatever. It's not a market value, it's a structural value created with the program. Sometimes you can get people to recognize that things have not gone as intended. Sometimes you can basically do a do-over. It's not used. It's not typical that that happens. There are certain legal and tax issues that will have to be taken into effect. But it can be done. And typically, it'll be done by creating sufficient options to reallocate the equity position of the individuals in a way that everybody agrees now is what it should be. Excuse me. Sometimes that person is leaving and you know the exercise of the buyback can be troublesome, particularly in a contentious situation. So there may be a way to barter your way to get those shares back on a way that would be mutually agreeable. It could be some portion of acceleration of the vesting. It could be, say, a consulting agreement will pay you $5,000 a month for the next 36 months, things like that. One of the things you might do is you stick your head in the sand, play an ostrich, and say, we'll let the next round investors figure that out. As an individual, one of your weapons in your quiver is to threaten to leave if you're being treated unfairly. And if you threaten to leave, you better be prepared to leave. If it's not a real threat, that will be obvious to all the people. Going back to the investors, this is the most frequent posture that a company takes. And again, it's an issue of, gee, we can't make decisions among ourselves, or we can't agree on things among ourselves. So we'll let the next guys do it. They're professional investors. They know what they're doing. They'll recognize my value. I'll be taken care of fine. Those new investors have no allegiance to the history of your company. Those investors are thinking about it, making an investment today. Those investors are looking at what needs to be done moving into the future. And those investors won't really care a whole lot about how you did it initially. And as such, what they will try to do as a condition of their investor is to re-divvy things or to compensate things or make changes that are detrimental to you personally or to you as a group in exchange for them bringing the financing to the table. You don't want to leave it up to the investors. Okay, so now we've gotten through the founders and we've gotten through the founder's pie. And we've talked about some of the remedies if things are going sideways. So, let's take a look at overall equity compensation. When the day is done, and there are lots of other examples, but when the day is done, the founders and management will typically own somewhere between a fifth and a third of the company at the time of a liquidity event, when the company goes public or when it gets acquired. So you need to look at things in that context, is that what's 40% today is not going to be 40% after several rounds of funding and an exit. Generally speaking, there will be stock option pools set up in the range of 10 to 25%. And those pools are stock options that can be used to attract new employees to the company. And since it is likely your company does not have a complete management team, you're going to need stock options to entice people to join your company. So what is a stock option? Stock option is not stock, number one. Stock option is the right to buy a share of stock sometime in the future at a price established at the time of the grant. So at the end of the first year, things have moved ahead. You've gotten a round of funding. The price of the round of funding can be used to establish your exercise price. And so, for the sake of argument, let's say the fair market value of the underlying common shares might be $1 a share. And so that would be the exercise price. Then your hope is that over time, the share price increases dramatically and you can exercise at a low price and then sell at a high price. And I have a small example about that. Stock options typically have a specific length. That's only relevant if there's not been a liquidity event and you're coming upon one of those expiration dates. You will have to make a decision on whether you exercise the options or not. So let's take a look. You got 50,000 options, $1 exercise price. In 5 years, the company is acquired at $10 per share. So at the time of that exit, you can buy 50,000 shares at $1 per share, sell those 50,000 shares at $10 a share, and have a gain of $450,000. And if you add a decimal place to this or two, you can see how that level of compensation could be very, very meaningful. There are income tax issues associated with all of this. How many options is enough? That's not the right question. Here we've got an offer of 5,000 options. Well, how many shares are outstanding? How much of the company do 5,000 shares mean? And you can see here anywhere from half to 1/20th of 1%. So the key thing is you have to know the total fully diluted shares of the company. And then you could put the offer in that context. And one of the things that you find quite often is that an early stage company like this is likely to have millions or tens of millions of shares of stock. And you're going, well, this guy told me that we could get away with just 10,000 shares, and we'll divvy them up. And the math is less complex, or the decimal places. The thing is, if I offer you 10 options, you're not going to be jumping up and down and saying, wonderful. If I offer you 10,000 options, the optics are sort of interesting. If I offer you 10 million options, wow. And all of those numbers actually are equal in terms of their actual value. And so, generally speaking, you want to be able to make option grants in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of options. And so that's why you'll see so many shares being related to a particular company. Vesting, I alluded to it. So just like the founder shares are subject to buyback, stock options vest over time. And so what happens is I offer you a grant of 100,000 options, and you will own those options over a time-based schedule. And this is intended to tether you to the company and to provide ongoing incentive compensation. The typical vesting schedule will be 25% of your options vest on the first anniversary, and then 1/36th of the balance over the next 36 months. And the total vesting period is 4 years. That's what you'll see in virtually every deal that I've seen recently. That's a typical vesting schedule. The cliff means it's a lump sum. So it means if we're 100,000 shares, it means a 20 or options, it would mean that 25,000 would be vested as of the first anniversary. Also, thinking about it from a cynic's eye, it also means anybody that is offered a pot of options, you're really on probation for the first year, because those options don't transfer to you, or ownership doesn't fall to you until the first anniversary. And so if the person isn't working out, you have the ability to let that person go without them holding any options. The monthly vesting is a way to tether you. And also, one of the big considerations is if the company is on a path to being acquired. Acquisitions are greatly influenced by the people that are involved in the acquired company. And there's a desire to keep as many of those people as possible. And so when a company is acquired, the existing options are converted to the new company and then continue their vesting schedule as originally intended. And again, this is a way to smooth the transfer from one company to another by helping preserve the employees of the company. Quite often, you're going to hear the phrase small piece of a larger pie. And if you saw the asterisks on the title slide, there are lots of slides that are hidden. So, but as we look at this, we're talking about a company that starts with 100,000 shares. It brings in an investor. The investor invests $1 million for half of the company after a stock option pool has been established. Then, which is probably round 2 is probably Series A, you've got another investor. That investor is investing $5 million at $11 and change. So $6 to $11 on a per share price, you're building that value. Same thing happens. Series B, probably $10 million investment at a $21 share price. And then finally, the company goes public, sells 20% of its shares, raises $37.5 million. And what you can see is the founder goes from 100% to 30 to 11.25 to 727 to 5.1. Whoops. But look at the value. Who knows what the shares were worth originally, but with each investment and it changed the price, 600,000, 1.125 million, 2.2 billion, 11 million. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking at this as your forecast of the company's future, you have to take a look and say, even though I'm losing percent ownership, I'm gaining great value. And you have to determine, is that value sufficient for you to make the sacrifices that you're going to have to make to start your company? Or is that a great outcome and you're happy to see was there? That's a personal decision. But this is the concept of smaller piece of a bigger pie. The value of that piece changes over time, hopefully in a positive way. Now, we've gotten past all that. Now let's talk about individuals. And so this is when a company wants to make a hire of a key person. So if the company is moving along well, commercial progress, and it's decided that a CEO needs to be recruited in order to structure the company in a way that will be attractive to investors. If this CEO has been successful in raising money with prior companies, those kind of things, then that individual might be offered 8 to 12% at that moment in time. Excuse me. Sometimes you're in a situation where the CEO founder is really married to that designation and resists the idea of bringing in a CEO and bumping them to the side, say a CTO. In those kind of circumstances, if it's practical, then you might recruit a COO, a president, a general manager, the business person who makes the bubble machine bubble. And so that's the person who's long on management skills and may be a little short in terms of fundraising. Usually, there are one or two key direct reports to senior management. These are the VPs or director level people. And usually one or two of them are absolutely essential. For example, if this were a university Spinout and the technical team is composed of university people, hiring the VP of engineering is probably one of the most important deals you're going to do, because academics are not very well known for keeping on a time schedule and keeping on a budget. And in the business world, both of those are essential. So bringing on board a VP of engineering who will take over the development of the product and its delivery can be essential. Directors, members of the board of directors, they will merit somewhere between 0.5% and 1%. Advisors, about half that. A key distinguishing difference is that directors have, by sitting on the board, they assume some fiduciary responsibilities that advisors don't. And in some cases, the directors personally may have to come up with money out of their pockets if certain things happen within the business. Talked about the founder vesting. There's also vesting acceleration. And the most typical one is called a double trigger. And it's typically something that a CEO founder will get, and perhaps one or two VPs will get. And what it says is, okay, our job was to take the company to a liquidity event so that the investors could get their money out. We've done that. Therefore, half of the outstanding options or vesting schedule is accelerated and treated as being completed as of the closing. Then the other half will continue to vest on the original schedule unless you leave the company and the company wishes you well. There's no animosity, in which case the second trigger comes into play. And in a situation like that, you're talking about keeping a CEO on board to manage the transition from independent company to part of a larger firm. And it's sort of presumed that the CEO, in most cases, is not going to thrive in a big company environment. So keeping them tethered for these purposes is typical. You can take a look at how your equity is going to look over time. You need professional advice. These are ultimately tied into legal documents that are structured by investors who do this daily, who engage attorneys daily, and you're doing this maybe 3 or 4 times in your life, and this is the first time. The playing field is not level. Therefore, you need to recruit mentors, advisors, etc., who can help you. And don't do anything without strong professional assistance. This is not where you want to be cheap. Being cheap on this type of activity can be extremely expensive in the longer term.